This is Columbia REIA's first online meeting. Obviously, right now because of the environment we're in, but it's not unforeseen that we wouldn't have some more going forward in the future. A lot of our people that come are mostly newcomers, so wholesaling and beginning investing is a lot of the topics we'll cover in the future as things get back to whatever we call normal. But I really appreciate everybody coming tonight, and especially you, Bob, for putting this slideshow on for the people.
Well, thank you, Rick. By the way, your camera's on. I just want to let you know there's a big spider on your bookshelf behind you. You can get it after the meeting, though.
There's a spider back there?
Just joking around, Rick.
No, there may be one.
Okay.
After last night, I would believe anything.
Anyway, okay. But yeah, you just want me to launch into the wholesaling thing, Rick?
I think that'll be good. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. Well, this is as Rick was saying. Rick is one of the co-organizers of the Columbia Real Estate Investors Association. They've been around for a while. When did Terry start this? Columbia Real Estate
Well,
Investors Association been around since.
we split off from Scott Lane and crowd about 12 years ago, maybe somewhere around
Yeah.
there.
Okay. So you, yeah. So you Columbia REIA's got some history behind it, and they got some experienced investors and whatnot. And I'm actually strong arming Rick where we can work out a reciprocity agreement of sorts. But anyway, that's kind of the short story. But yeah, Rick, D'Angelo, and Keisha are all very experienced. D'Angelo and Keisha, actually Rick too, they have their real estate licenses, so they're doing the investing thing as realtors also. Anyway,
It's a
but
little
if it's
bit
okay,
different.
Rick, let me go ahead.
It's a little
Yeah,
bit
oh
different as
yeah.
a realtor. I'm sure maybe everybody on the webinar knows that, but you have to disclose about every 10 seconds that you're a real estate agent when you're investing.
Yeah, you do. Absolutely. But it's okay, Rick. I'm going to launch into this, okay?
Great.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Anyway, oops. How do I get this thing moving? Okay. Okay, liability disclosure. Columbia REIA assumes no liability or what's being shown here. This is from personal experience, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And neither Rick nor I or any of the Columbia organizers are licensed attorneys or financial planners or advisors. So if you question anything legally or financially what's on this, seek qualified help because technically speaking, we're not it. Okay. I can only tell you what I and others have done from personal experience. Okay. Now, just a little review for those of you who've been on, our introductory webinar that we've held for some people. Some of this will be a review. Okay. For example, the the way we learned the way we do real estate, creative real estate, there are five main ways to profit from this, basically to make money. One is wholesaling, and that's what we're going to cover a lot of now. Wholesaling, cash wholesaling, and rehab. Well, not so much rehabbing, but more likely wholesaling. You're basically finding a screaming good deal and you're selling it as a good deal to your end buyer, usually an investor, and you're pocketing the difference between what you buy it at from the seller and what you sell to the end buyer. Um, Retail. This is rehabbing to an end buyer, typically an owner occupant. In my experience, you can make good money at this and you can lose a lot of money at this. I remember some houses I made really good money at when I first started out as a rehabber, but I also remember houses where I paid to do the work on because I knew I was losing money. So that kind of stinks. Getting deeds. This is the creative stuff. Subject to, you're buying a house subject to the existing financing remaining in place. And it works best for houses that are in nice areas that are move-in ready. And this is actually my preferred model because it usually requires little to no rehab to be able to make money off of it. Options. This is kind of like stock options. What you're doing is you're putting a property under option, I should say, to buy it. And the idea is you're going to flip under a certain period of time for a certain price. The idea is you're going to flip the option, okay, to somebody else, or maybe just execute the option yourself and buy it. I don't use options. I include it for completeness. But realistically, my contracts, the way they're written, they're pretty much options. And I'll show you what I mean. Owner financing. Owner financing is also a very desirable way to make money off of, especially over leveraged houses. Okay, when you can get really good terms. Here's an example. I have a 1983 pickup truck. It's beat to crap. The AC doesn't work, but it runs. Okay, but I could sell it for $1 million. The terms might be $1 a year for 1,000,000 years. Okay, I bet you I could take a buyer for that. On paper, it'd be $1 million, but it's great terms. Okay, that's an extreme, of course. And you can see here, subject twos, the getting deeds, it's actually a subtopic of seller financing. Okay. And you'll see that comes in to play a little bit later with Dodd-Frank, with an act called the Dodd-Frank Act and stuff. Okay. 5 steps to success the way I originally learned it. And of course, there are variations of this is, I think, locating and pre-screening the prospects. Number 1 and 2 are the most important. Okay. Without a motivated seller, a highly motivated seller, it's really tough to do a whole lot more with that deal. Okay. Constructing and presenting offers, following up and selling quickly, they'll fall into place. We like to emphasize finding those highly motivated sellers first. However, the mechanics of this presentation is going to be a lot on constructing and presenting offers, et cetera. Okay. Let's talk about locating prospects. Now, I think it's easier to find motivated sellers first and then back into what they own, rather than look for properties and make blanket offers hoping a motivated seller is behind it. What I'm looking for is what will motivate a seller to sell quickly and at a heavy discount. There's some pretty obvious ones up here, like pre-foreclosure. There's a time frame on them. Okay, well, here's an example. Okay, right now, foreclosures and evictions have been suspended until at least May 1st. Okay, and is it the possibility that maybe some owner financed people with buyers in default, or maybe landlords who had evictions? Like I actually had one down in Aiken that was in process, an eviction, and it got halted in its tracks. Let's say a landlord has a mortgage payment barking up his butt, okay, and all of a sudden he can't evict a defaulted tenant. Okay, he might be very motivated to sell that property now. So looking in eviction courts now might be a pretty nice place for leads right now. A mismanaged rental, same thing, a tired landlord. You'll see a lot of these overlap. Pre-foreclosures and divorces are pretty common. A loss of job and bankruptcy, or maybe failed business and bankruptcy, very common. Even the property-related ones, even though we're looking for properties like this, we're really looking for the seller. We're looking for a seller who's lost pride of ownership in the property or just doesn't have the money to fix it, okay? So this is actually a technique called driving for dollars, basically. And it's actually a great technique I've found. Okay, in my mind, I need to ask myself, what does a potential motivated seller need? And how can I help fix the problem? The most common one for me anyway has been they need cash pretty quickly, okay? As you go down the list here, I'd say they need to know they can trust you and that you care about the problems they're going through, that you're listening to their concerns. That gets a little more important when you try to do something creative with them, like a subject to or a sandwich lease option or something. So I'd say the first and the last 2 are the most common ones that I've run into. However, the other needs for motivated sellers also come into play also. I have this chart here to just show when I first ask some of the newer investors, what do they look for deals, I should say. They talk about the multiple listing service and the foreclosure auctions and other auctions. And that's true. That's where the houses, the inventory is. That's also where the competition is. When I see competition, I run the other way because competition just drives up the price. In fact, earlier today, I spoke to a lady. She has a house on Commonwealth Boulevard. It's a probate. And she contacted me through one of my mailers. And I was going to schedule a time to meet with her with my contractor. And it turns out she had 2 other people looking at it. So I backed off. Okay. And I said, I'll tell you what, ma'am. If it looks like our cash numbers will be pretty close in line with theirs. So let me know if they give you offers that you don't like, give me a call and maybe we can get out there. So I back off from competition. Now that's up to you. If you're a competitive person and you want to jump into the fray, be my guest. But lots of times in these kind of competitions, what I've found is even if you win, you lose. Talking about locating prospects, realtors. I do have realtors up here. I don't look for properties through realtors. I find the investor friendly ones. And those are the ones who will give me, for example, expired listings that have not been relisted. They'll now, don't get me wrong. They're not doing this for free for me. Some way I'm compensating them or will compensate them. And they need to know they can trust you. Okay. So just don't go up to any realtor and say, hey, I want expired listings, that sort of thing. But also keyword searches in the multiple listing service. When you log in, there are two comment fields. One of them is the public field that you see at realtor.com, anyone sees. And the other one is the one that only logged in realtors can see. For example, in the public field, they might say, beautiful 3-bedroom, 2-bath house overlooking the lake. And in the private field that only logged in realtors might say short sale, highly motivated. Okay. So we do keyword search. We have our realtors do keyword searches like that in both fields. As I mentioned, driving for dollars is especially good in my experience. Reason being is the easier a list of prospects is to get, the more competition you're going to have for those houses. When you drive for dollars, you're the only one with that list, that unique list, I should say. Some houses might overlap, but because you're creating that list. Now, there's a technique called hidden markets. Every year and a half or so, we have an outside speaker come in from Atlanta, Tony Youngs, and he's the one who showed me this hidden markets thing. I actually bought his course back in 2010 or 11, so I've had it for a while. He's basically showing you where to drive for dollars where you know people are buying, particularly investors. Now, there's the ant farm technique. What you're doing is you're positioning yourself as the queen ant, and you're having worker ants bring you deals. Here's an example. There's two people in particular that come to mind, Carlos Barrera and Freddie Castro. Okay, especially Freddie. He didn't know anything about real estate like at the beginning of last year. But what he has is he has a very good grip on Latino buyers with cash. Okay, a lot of the Latino workers and whatnot have cash. I don't know if they just don't trust banks. So he has a lot of trust with them. So he's always closing deals. He's joint venturing with people who bring him deals. So he doesn't have to even look for deals. He has the buyers, and people know that. Carlos, same thing. Okay. So position yourself as the queen ant and have the worker ants bring you deals. Okay. Bandit signs. I think for dollar, bandit signs will probably give you the most leads, but there's a couple of cautions about that. Okay. I'll show you in the next slide. One of them is I used to tell our folks, don't put bandit signs inside city or town limits, to keep them just outside. But even now, in certain areas, the sheriff's deputies are cracking down on that. Okay, you got to be careful of that. There's some areas where they don't enforce the bandit, the no signs rule, but they're starting to crack down on them now. So you got to be a little careful. Keep track of where you put your signs. Direct mail. My best leads have actually come from direct mail. Okay. It's an under the radar technique. I don't have to worry about code enforcement or deputies saying, take down your signs. But anyway, it's not the cheapest way to go, but I found my best leads from there. It's highly targeted. Online, we talk about SEO, search engine optimization, Craigslist, Realtor.com, Fizbo.com, etc. I can show you a couple of tricks with search engine optimization. If you do like something like a Google search on Sell House Fast Columbia or something like that, my website typically shows up on the first page. What I do is I link it to highly regarded authority sites like Facebook, Manta, stuff like that. And it's called a backlink. So that apparently raises it in the search engine's eyes. Okay. And if you don't have a website now, at the very least, you got to have one for some credibility. Nowadays, everyone should have a website. Cold calling and voice blasts. I'll discuss a little bit of that also, but yes, we do cold calling and voice blasts. Now, some people like to cold call themselves. I use a service called Callfire. Okay. And now there are several services that do that. CallRail, REI Pro. I like Callfire because you can pay as you go. The other two, I believe you have to pay a monthly subscription fee. Callfire, you can pay 6 cents a call. 6 cents a minute, basically, and it's cheap. So I like to use Callfire because I don't call blast that often. And we can discuss other ways at the end, given the time constraints. Pre-screening prospects. Now, when you pre-screen them, I believe you must ask them at least these main questions to be able to make an intelligent offer. Okay, and you want to know what are they asking? You want to know how much the property is worth, how much in repairs is needed, and mortgage loan information, specifically balance, total monthly payments, PITI, and is it current or behind? Now, what I do is I ask the seller this. I don't research any of this. I ask the seller this because I want to hear the motivation in their voices. Okay. For example, if I say to the seller, is there a mortgage on the house or is it you own it free and clear? And they say, I really don't feel comfortable talking to you about that. I don't say something like, well, I can get it anyway, which you probably can. I just tell them, I say, I need to get an idea how best to help you out here. And it also gives an indication to you how motivated they are to work with you if they're not going to give that information. Okay, constructing and presenting offers. There's something that it's become known as what's called the 70% rule. Okay. Anyway, let me explain a little bit of that. Okay. Now, I've heard people call this MAO, maximum allowable offer. I like to slip that C in there, maximum allowable cash offer, because the MAO, the maximum allowable offer for an owner or seller financed property, can be considerably higher than what you need to put in to pay all cash for. Okay. If you're making a maximum allowable cash offer, and this is kind of the general criteria, you want to establish two numbers: the after repaired value to sell within 3 months under non-distressed conditions, as well as the repair figure. Okay. Now keep in mind your after repaired value has to have some kind of time limit on it. Okay. Otherwise you might be stuck holding on to properties longer than you plan to. One thing I also tell people is, the newbies especially, if you plan to wholesale the house and not rehab it or retail for, sell for retail price, never put down more than $10 earnest money. And there's a reason for that, because if the deal goes south, if you're trying to wholesale it and you just can't find a buyer, what do you lose? $10. Okay. Now, that being said, do the right thing and don't just randomly put houses under contract, throw it up against the wall like spaghetti and hope something sticks. Do your analysis and do your best to help the sellers. Okay. But you also got to protect yourself. This is what they call the 70% rule, is what I've heard it called. It's the maximum, as a retailer or rehabber, if you will, the maximum allowable cash offer that you should pay is 70% of the after repaired value minus the repair amount. Now, I say with a minimum spread of $20,000, and that's my criteria, because you'll see below this $66,000 number, that 30% difference falls below $20,000. Okay. And the way I see it, if I'm going to take the hassle, risk, and whatnot to rehab and resell a $50,000 property versus a $125,000 property, I want to make at least $20,000. Okay. Rehabbing takes risk. It takes time, risk, aggravation. I want to make a minimum $20,000 if I'm going to do the same amount of work. This is why that 70% rule exists. And I've compared this to some of my cash closings. It seems to be pretty accurate. Okay. You can see here, all these percentages add up to that 30%, which is why 70% of the after repaired value is pretty much what we want to come in at. This assumes we get a minimum acceptable profit of 20%. I'll let you decide what you want to accept as your minimum acceptable profit. Okay. Minus 20%. And I think you'll find most rehabbers have that 20% profit minimum also. Okay, estimating repairs. It's good to have a good contractor with you the first couple times. We do have a list of typical repair costs and whatnot historically for bread and butter houses. When you start getting into stuff like mini mansions on the lake and stuff, the lists that I have anyway tend to fall apart. Okay, you need to really boost your repair estimates then. Now, one thing I did learn, though, is you don't have to be exact with the cost. Just in the ballpark will do. Okay, especially if you're wholesaling. You don't have your end buyers are going to have to do their own due diligence ultimately. You just have to be in the ballpark with your own repair costs to make a reasonable offer. this is what I use. Now, obviously, take your own cost, your own list, if you will. This is what I use for a bread and butter house to assess how much in repairs a house might need. Um, as I mentioned before, this may or may not apply to those mini mansions, but you can kind of see here the big value this gives to me is it's a checklist. I remember going through a house without this and thinking I could memorize everything. I forgot to check the electric. Okay, stuff like that. Okay, so anyway, that's what I use. If it's okay, I'm going to shut off, mute all, and I'm going to unmute Rick. Where are you, Rick? Okay, I unmuted Rick. Hope nobody minds. Okay, now that was the rehab Mako, the 70% rule. If you're wholesaling, you got to bring the price in even lower to make your wholesale fee. Okay, I used to have a typical guideline: 5% of the after repair value, or $2,000, whichever is greater. I remember helping one of the new wholesalers, Larry Glenn, wholesaled his first deal in Forest Acres, and he sold the house for $65,000 to an end buyer. Rick, I don't know if you remember Stoneburner, Braden Stoneburner. That name ring a bell?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, Braden was the one who bought that off of Larry. Okay, if I recall, it was like a $65,000 house. Larry pocketed $20,000. Okay, so that's when I scratched off my typical guideline. You know, use your common sense. Braden he's experienced. He's not a newbie. He got the numbers he wanted. He didn't care what Larry made as long as he got his number. Okay. So in the end, I scratched that off because if Larry had listened to this criteria, I'd have probably hosed him out of maybe $18,000 in profit. Okay, on a $65,000 house. Anyway, and again, I'm going to repeat: if planning to wholesale a property, I say now, obviously this is up to you, but I say never put more than $10 earnest money down. All right. For deals that go above the maximum allowable cash offer, you have a choice of creative stuff: lease options, land contracts, sandwich lease options, subject to lease options, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But again, with all these, again, you're dealing directly with a seller. When you're dealing with realtors, it's tough to say, hey, I'm just going to put $10 earnest money. Okay. So stuff like this, you generally have to deal directly with the seller, the sellers of record, all of them. Presenting offers to realtors. Never tell a realtor you need a buyer before you can close. That's kind of the kiss of death. Okay, you're basically telling the realtor you don't have the money. Okay, you're telling them you're going to try to be a realtor without a license. Okay. Also, one thing I've heard some of the gurus say, whether it be YouTube or these seminars, they say, just tell your seller you represent a group of buyers. I say no. Okay, that makes you look like a seminar grad, in my opinion. Tell them you're the buyer. Okay, let them know you're the be-all, end-all, the decision maker. Also, if you want your offers accepted the highest percentage of times, you minimize your contingencies. Okay. Also, when you're dealing with a realtor, I remember talking with several realtors who are very traditional realtors, and I offered to do the contract for them. I just want to minimize the work. They insisted they wanted to do the offers. Okay, well, I'll let them do it. Okay. Anyway, I think I argued with one is Rachel Harper Realty down in Aiken. And I said, no, Miss Harper, she's an old lady back then. I don't even know if she's still alive, but and she was insisting she wanted to do the contract. I think they want to feel they earned their commission, so I let them do it. Okay, when I deal with realtors, the few times I do, but when you're dealing with a realtor, be prepared to put up at least $500 earnest money. I still have a couple of earnest money checks out there that I signed. I'm afraid to try. One was Maynard Robinson. I don't even know if he's still a realtor. The other one's Jason King, J. King Real Estate. This is when he was with Asset Realty. I don't know whatever happened to that blank check. I guess it stayed with Asset Realty when he started J. King Real Estate. But I'm reluctant to change my account because I have so many auto withdrawals and transactions with it now. But I do keep an eye on it, and I keep it pretty lean. So if they try to write a check on it, it's going to bounce. Okay. But that's the only peace of mind I have. So I don't like to do that. So like I said, I don't like to buy properties through realtors, but I will work with realtors given they give me the information I need to source the deal. And of course, as I mentioned before, make sure they're compensated well for it. Presenting offers to sellers. Okay. I always ask, I need to get some kind of indication, not necessarily an exact number from the seller, but a range. And if they won't give me a range, I'm going to do something ridiculously low. Now, to be fair, sometimes they take that ridiculously low number. Okay, Rick, one of these days, if you get a chance, I want you to come over to my house at 109 Stump Road. Okay, this is a house I was going to rent out. I made a ridiculously low offer, and the seller accepted it. $9,500. She accepted it. I said, "You got to be kidding me." Okay, so occasionally you'll get your ridiculously low offer accepted, but ultimately you want to use that to get the number out of the seller first if you can. One thing I always do is I always make at least 2 offers to the sellers. One is an all cash offer at a severe discount, and the other one is, given proper price and terms, I'll generally give them the price they want. And in some very rare cases, I might even offer a little bit more than what they want, saying, if you're willing to give me these terms. And I also let them choose, let them know that they're in control of which offer they want to choose. Because lots of times you're dealing with distressed sellers. You want to give them some kind of control over it to make them feel comfortable. Following up. Let's talk about following up a little bit. After a verbal offer is accepted and before you start marketing the house, there are 2 steps. Get a contract. Now, you don't necessarily need to have your affidavit signed by the seller. I may scratch this out, okay? Richland County was initially insisting you get the recordable affidavit signed. We took care of that, okay? I give, when people call me, I give them typical affidavits that were recorded without having it signed by the seller, and it gets them to record your affidavit. The Register of Deeds offices have been especially stubborn, allowing us to record these affidavits, okay? By law, they're supposed to. So, I mean, I have it. So whenever I record my affidavit, I print out the Register of Deeds handbook and circle that one part that says by law they're required to do that, and I take it with me. Okay, and also take copies of previously recorded affidavits to say, you guys did it before, why not now? And that generally gets me past them, all right? Now, the only contract clause, and this is how I minimize my contingencies in my contracts. The only contract clause I ever use is, in event of buyer's default, earnest money deposit is seller's sole remedy. For $10 earnestly, what's a seller's sole remedy? $10. Okay, like I said, don't abuse that. Okay, do the best you can by the seller. Don't just randomly put stuff under contract and hope something sticks. Okay, and as I mentioned before, if you smell a rat, if you think someone's trying to go around you, and as I mentioned, this is personal experience. I'm not a lawyer. In my experience, real estate law, especially contract law in South Carolina, is very weak. Okay, I've even bought a house down in Aiken. There was no contract. The only thing that really matters, ultimately, I've discovered, is what's on the settlement statement and what's on the deed. That's it. Okay. Now, the vast majority of attorneys will want a contract because they want to cover themselves. Okay, make sure they don't get in trouble with their boards and whatnot. But also, it tells them how to close the deals. Okay. However, if you smell a rat, I say record that affidavit to protect the deal. It's not 100% protection, because a cash buyer can still buy around that affidavit. What they cannot get is title insurance. Okay, that's enough to deter most buyers from buying a property with an affidavit recorded on it. Okay, they need to get that title insurance, and especially in a place like the Midlands here, Columbia, Lexington, whatever, there was a lot of railroad activity here. So if you don't have title insurance, you might always be under the shadow of the threat that maybe some railroad company a couple hundred years ago might come up. Someone might come and say, "Hey, we still own this land." Okay, I learned this from a person who worked for Chicago Title. She's in Columbia here. Her name's Terry Callan. I took an attorney continuing ed course and on real estate, and she was the one who actually said about all the railroad activity here. So anyway, generally speaking, record that affidavit if you really want to protect the deal. I'm a lazy guy. I'm only going to record the affidavit if it's a really juicy deal. Okay. But some people record it for every contract they have signed. I don't necessarily agree with that because I think you're wasting time and money, but that's, you know, that's up to you. Also, check the title or at least check the deed online to make sure you're dealing with all sellers. Okay. I know two people who shall remain unnamed. They put a property under contract in Whitehall, and they had to go back again because only the husband signed the contract. Turns out that the wife and the daughter were also on the deed. Okay, so I make sure I'm dealing with all sellers of record, and you can look that up, you know, in the public record online. Generally, Richland County is a little tougher, but Lexington County, not a problem. Also, selling quickly. Let's talk a little bit about that. Generally speaking, you probably want to have several different lists of sellers. Okay. For example, in a recession, some builders might buy these houses from you, wholesale houses from you for no profit to them, just to keep their guys busy. That's what I found out last recession. They just want to keep their good workers busy. They don't want to lose them to their competition. Okay. Landlords, other than owner occupants, will generally pay more for properties than rehabbers or investors. Oh, rehabbers and investors are cheap. You know, I know I'm cheap. Okay. Rent to own buyers are probably the most easy to find. You just put out, these are people who want to live in the properties, but they can't get bank financing or won't get bank financing for whatever reason. You put bandit signs out there, no banks, no credit, no, bad credit, okay, stuff like that, and they'll come running. Okay. Now, the issue with rent to own buyers is they typically have a shorter shelf life than, say, investors, because once they find the home they want to live in, they're done. Okay. At least for the time being. Also, from your own marketing of properties, okay, you want to keep the people who didn't buy your house. You want to keep them kind of, you know, on standby because you might have another house that you can present to them. Dummy ads. I say use with caution. I remember there's a guy named Tyrone White. Okay. I used to see his bandit signs everywhere. We buy houses, cash or terms, 753-7373, everywhere. Okay. He hasn't put out many as of late. I think it's because of the crackdown the deputies are doing on bandit signs, possibly. But anyway, I remember I called one sign. It is a phone number I didn't recognize. $80,000 house, owner finance, 3-bed, 2-bath, or whatever it was. And it was Tyrone. Okay. So he was actually trolling for buyers too. He didn't have a house. He was just trolling for buyers. Okay. Networking. Networking, it doesn't even have to be a real estate related event. It's funny how things just get out there. Like, for example, before this meeting, I was talking to Kiki Cyrus. We were talking with Kiki Cyrus. She owns a great restaurant, Kiki's Chicken and Waffles. And she's actually on this meeting now, but I didn't meet her at a real estate event. Okay. So get your networks built and not necessarily just at real estate events. Okay. Also, foreclosure sales and other auctions are great places to market your properties, your wholesale properties, because you know there's cash buyers there. Okay. Other places to market your wholesale properties include social media, the MLS now, the multiple listing service. This is what I learned. Back when I first started doing short sales back in 2006 or so, okay, you didn't need to have limited power of attorney, at least down in the Aiken area. That's where I started, you know, my real estate stuff was down in Aiken. All you needed was to have it on contract saying that I have the right to put the property in the multiple listing service or any other means to market. Now you need to have at least a limited power of attorney, okay? Limited power of attorney is what will get you past brokers in charge and whatnot and allow you to put a house for sale in the multiple listing service without you owning it yet, okay? But, you know, going directly to you, all marketing directly to you, all right? So you need that limited power of attorney if you can use the MLS to market your wholesale deals. Online, unless you buy it, of course. Online classifieds, Craigslist, Zillow, etc. I used to love Backpage. You can see it's kind of crossed out now. After this online meeting, if you go to backpage.com, you'll see it was commandeered by the FBI. I used to love it because it ranked very well in the search engines, but apparently they got involved with human trafficking, drugs, and money laundering, and the FBI took it over. And I think the 3 founders, either they're in prison or they're on trial to be put into prison. Foreclosure sales and other auctions, I already mentioned, REIA meetings and other events. Eventually, Rick, I hope Columbia REIA is going to have like a deal presentation session, formal one. I think your other meetings you have though, right? Your meetings in person. So
Yeah, we do. We have that at the beginning of the meetings when we meet in person, of course.
yeah, in fact, one of the local Home Investors franchisees, Greg Lanier, has actually used these REIA meetings to sell some of his properties at. So yeah, they're pretty handy. There are two basic ways to close a wholesale deal. Okay, one's a simultaneous closing. It's an assignment of contract. You're basically selling the contract to your end buyer for your assignment fee. And at closing, your end buyer actually steps into your shoes at closing. You don't even have to go to closing. Just make sure the attorney knows that you're going to get paid. Okay, you're not in the chain of title. Okay, so I don't mind wholesaling using my personal name if it's an assignment. I'm not in chain of title. Now, double closing is when you have two separate closings. Okay, you're signing a contract with your seller and your end buyer, and you're doing two separate closings. In that case, there you will be in the chain of title. I suggest you keep your name off the public record, using like a land trust maybe, or an LLC or something. Just keep your personal name off of public record. Now, generally, you need funds to do a double closing that come maybe from the seller. Okay, now there's some debate as to whether or not this is illegal because it's not an arm's length transaction, they say. Okay, I know some attorneys will do it, and I know some who won't. Okay, if you do a double closing and your buyer is funding both closings, okay, some attorneys think that's illegal. I don't know the answer on that one. I'm gonna ask my Legal Shield attorney about that. Okay, but I've had the double closings I've done except for the ones where I use something called transactional funding, I've had the end buyer fund both closings without a problem. Okay, if it's illegal, we did it illegally. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to check with, as I mentioned, my Legal Shield attorney. But in the case where you do need funds, wet funds to close your seller to you transaction, there's something called transactional funding. Okay, that's basically flash cash. Okay, you're having a lender put money into escrow with the attorney, and immediately that money is going back to the lender with his return after you sell the property to C, your end buyer. Okay, I can recommend a couple people. I don't know if he wants mentioned by name now, but if you give us a call afterwards, I can recommend especially one person who's become a master at transactional funding. He's a very reliable lender. So anyway, steps for a simultaneous closing. Okay, a contract amendment. Have the buyer, your end buyer, once you have it under contract with the seller, have your end buyer sign your assignment of contract and put your whole. Now I say put your wholesale fee into escrow. Some people just get the fee from the buyer right there. You have to have a really good relationship with your end buyer to do that. Because in my experience, they say, how do I know you're not going to take my money and run off? Okay. So I have them put it into escrow with an attorney who does wholesale deals. I like using Rich Bolin. Okay. He's probably one of the best in terms of creative deals. If the buyer insists on using his attorney, I strongly suggest you call that attorney well before closing and let that attorney know what's going on. Okay, make sure he understands what you're doing in advance. Otherwise, you may end up with an unpleasant surprise at closing, as in it fails. You give your contract. You contract with the seller, an assignment of contract to the closing attorney, and again, make sure the attorney knows you're there for an assignment fee. Otherwise, you may be bypassed. Okay, make sure that attorney knows. Then you follow up with the seller, buyer, and attorney. In my opinion, you want to follow up constantly. Don't just ignore it and expect to get a check at the end. It's amazing how many attorneys will make that mistake and just sell it directly to your end buyer and say, oh, what about the assignment fee? Okay, and the key is get paid. Okay, and again, as I mentioned before, since the buyer's stepping into your shoes, you don't have to really go to closing. Okay. Now, here's the issue with an assignment of contract. When your buyer steps into your shoes at closing, your end buyer, both your end buyer and your seller see what you made as an assignment fee on the settlement statement. This is a HUD-1. They actually use something now called a closing disclosure if a bank is involved. But for cash transactions or with private lenders, a lot of attorneys still just use a HUD-1. Okay, but you'll see here, both the seller and the end buyer see that Joe Home Buyers made $5,000 in assignment fee. Okay, in Larry Glenn's case, it would have said Larry Glenn $12,000 for a $65,000 property. I can almost guarantee you either the seller or his end buyer would have killed that deal at closing and tried to figure out a way to go around Larry to save some money. Steps for a double closing. After you have your seller sign a contract, do not have your buyer sign a contract unless your seller signs first. That's kind of fraud. Okay. So you have your seller, once your seller signs a contract, you want to have your buyer sign your contract and any other relevant documents. And again, you want to have your wholesale fee placed into escrow with the attorney. And again, I mentioned if the buyer wants to use his attorney, you call that attorney well before closing and make sure that he or she knows what they're doing. Okay. And again, give that attorney all the paperwork. Okay. Put your funds to buy from the seller into escrow. That's where transactional funding comes in. Okay. And follow up constantly. Make sure that deal's going on track. Okay. Don't just ignore it and expect a check at the end. And in this case here, you probably should attend close unless you're automated to the point where you have like people signing for you and whatnot. And there's actually some people who've done a great job at making it almost an automatic process. I suggest you go to closing so you can sign the deed over to your end buyer and get paid. This is something you really have to follow closely, in my opinion. Wholesaling houses recap. The key is to find a good deal and tie it up. If you don't find a good deal, what's the point? Okay, no one's going to buy it from you. All right. Also, check the title at least online a little bit. Ultimately, your attorney is going to be the one to have final say on the title search. So at least check the title to make sure at least it's reasonably clean. And also, you're dealing with all sellers. Okay. Market the property, get tied into a network. What I've noticed is a lot of wholesalers run in packs like wolves. Okay, and they do very well. Okay, it's the lone wolves, if you will, that sometimes have a hard time because they have to kind of, take everything by themselves. Okay. Joint venturing has been a great way for wholesalers to sell deals. Okay. Like I know JD and Ted are doing joint ventures together, stuff like that. Okay. Also build a buyer's list from the prospects who call you. Don't just throw them away after you're done with the deal. And also you got to give all necessary paperwork, especially the contract and assignment, to the attorney so that he or she knows how to close the deal. And then number 7 is close and get paid. Okay. Kind of like a step-by-step checklist. Transactional funding. Let's talk a little bit about that. As I mentioned, that's flash cash for funding quick wholesale flips. Generally, well, actually not rehabs. It's literally funding just a flash to say, yeah, I have the money to buy this. And you pay back that transactional lender when you sell it to your end buyer, okay, with their return. Fees typically range from 1 to 10 points per transaction with a minimum. For example, if you're only funding, like, say, a $20,000 deal, okay, what's 1 point of that? Is like $200 or something like that? Yeah, that's $200. Okay, I mean, I don't think you're going to get a transactional lender to lift a finger for that. Okay, so they typically charge a minimum, like say $1,500 to $2,000, whichever's greater. And those lenders are actually really easy to find once you explain to them the process, how their money is protected. Now, how do you protect a transactional lender's money? Generally speaking, I've yet to run into a transactional lender who will fund A to B unless the B to C funds are already in escrow. Okay, that's key right there. That almost completely assures your transactional lender who's funding A to B that B to C will occur. But that's not foolproof. I was actually funding a deal, that was a while ago, where B to C money was in place already, but just before it was going to close, the buyer died. Okay, now there's a decent amount of money, so I'm sweating bullets here, and the money was tied up for is like close to 2.5 months or something like that until the heirs finally decided to buy it out. Okay, but that's the short story. Anyway, it's it's as close to foolproof as you can get to making sure your transactional lender gets their money back, is that B2C funds have to be in escrow first. Okay. Possible. Hey, Rick, do I have more time to talk about a few more things, some tips
Yes,
and
sir.
tricks? Okay. Some obstacles to smooth closings. Okay. In non-assignable contracts, this is typical in realtor contracts. Now, in my experience, all contracts are assignable unless they say they're not assignable. Okay, that's why when you see these gurus say, put as buyer, like such and such LLC and or assigns, I don't put that in there. I just put such and such LLC or mine or whatever. Okay, I don't put and or assigns unless it has something like in there that this contract is non-assignable. Okay, that could be a possible glitch in your process. Also, title seasoning. There's something called title seasoning, where your end buyer's mortgage lender may require the seller to have owned the property for a certain period of time. Wholesales are typically quick, same day type things. Okay, so if your end buyer has a mortgage lender who's insisting that the seller, which would be you, has to have held the property for, like, say, 1 to 3 months. Well, that's not a same day transaction, is it? There's a couple ways around that, though. Okay. 5 ways to assign a non-assignable contracts. Okay. You can try to go ahead and assign it anyway. Okay. If nobody objects, even if the contract says it's non-assignable, if nobody objects, hey, just take the money and run. Okay. You got paid, run. Okay. Second way is just ask the seller to add an addendum to sign the contract. Okay, they may or may not agree. And I give a couple tips here where as it gets closer to closing, okay, banks are less likely to say no because they just want to see the property sold most of the time. Okay, with regards to title companies or attorneys, okay, you might want to have them let the banks know that purchase funds are already in escrow so they know the deal will go through. Okay. Also, another way to possibly assign non-assignable contracts is have your name as the buyer, then submit an addendum with your true end buyer joining you. Okay, after the closing, then you have a quitclaim deed signed over to you. I should say signed over to your end buyer, and he pays you to go away. Okay, that's another way to possibly do it. And again, this is all contingent. This is contingent upon the powers that be allowing this addendum to be added. And most of the time, it should be okay. Okay, creating an entity land trust. Okay, this is a possibility too. What you're doing is you're buying the property in your entity or land trust, and you're basically selling the rights to that entity. In the case of an LLC, you'd be selling the operating agreement. In the case of a land trust, you'd be selling the trust agreement to your end buyer. Okay, so you're basically both part of that LLC or land trust, and your end buyer is buying you out of the rights. Okay, double closing. As I mentioned before, you can assign non-assignable. I say assign loosely because it's not really an assignment, but it's a double close. Okay, now you're going to have increased costs as well as a few more moving parts because it is a completely separate closing. Okay. Now, one thing you might want to ask the closing attorney, I've heard it called a reissue rate on the title insurance for the second closing to get lower cost for that title insurance. Because generally speaking, these should be done at the same attorney's offices. Don't try to close at one attorney's office and then try to close the second one at another attorney's. I suggest you keep them at the same attorney's office. And since that attorney did the title work already, I don't see why he or she wouldn't mind putting a discount on it. Okay. And if you write your contracts properly, then you're passing on those closing costs anyway to your seller or your end buyer. Okay, you want to maximize your profit. Okay, reverse assignments. This is something I didn't cover in our introductory webinars. This is a little something. I used this twice down in Aiken. Okay, so it worked then. Whether it works now, you got to be a little careful. Make sure it'll work. Okay. As I mentioned before, there's something called title seasoning. Some mortgage lenders for the end buyers will not lend to their buyers until they're sure the seller has owned the property for a certain period of time, like say 90 days. Okay. Now, another way to get around the title seasoning issue is trying what's called a reverse assignment. Okay. What you're doing is this. Okay. You're basically, the short story of all this is basically saying is you're moving your assignment free from the buyer's side to the seller's side. You're changing it from assignment fee to a lien. Let me show you what I mean on the settlement statement. Okay. On a regular assignment of contract, you can see normally the $5,000 assignment fee would be on the buyer or the borrower's side of the settlement statement. With a reverse assignment, what you're doing is you're getting paid as a lien. Okay, it's a lien release fee. It's no longer an assignment fee. And you see it's here is being paid from the seller's side. Okay, you see that? That's all you're doing. So when a lender comes along and wants to see, hey, has the seller owned it for X number of months or whatever, you can say yes, but look, there's a lien here. Okay, and as long as it meets the lender's criteria, they should pay that off. In my experience, I mean, yes, they have. Anyway, where to get the money? You don't need much money to wholesale, get deeds or option properties. Okay, for times you need all cash to close, as I mentioned, partners, mortgage brokers, credit lines, not on your personal residence. Okay, back before the last recession. Okay, for the last recession, in fact, even now, I'm seeing people say, "Oh, I got all this equity in my home. I might as well put that to use and buy investment properties." Before the last recession, I believed that. I don't do that anymore. Okay, I saw people do. I don't, the BRRRR strategy, BRRRR, the refinance part and all that. I don't like that strategy. Not in South Carolina. It's too easy to buy them, subject to with the financing in place, to put your own name on a loan. Okay, seriously. And credit lines. Okay, using your personal residence as a source of cash to buy investment properties. I saw people do that before the last recession. They lost everything, including their homes. Okay, that's your foundation. That's your base. I suggest you do not leverage your personal residence, pay it off as soon as you can. That way, if you mess up, at least you have a place where you can go home, pull up a chair, and wonder what you did wrong. Okay, if you lose everything else. Also, private money. There are Facebook groups out there. If you can show that you have a deal that will protect their money, there are people out there who will put money into play. I was really surprised. One of the Facebook groups out there, I see people coming out of the woodwork who want to put money into play. Because rather than get like, well, a banker told me treasuries are yielding like 0.1% annual interest now or something like that. Rather than get that, why not get 12 to 15% lending to someone who's actually going to use it? Okay. You get a much better return. So I can see private lenders jumping out of the woodwork. Also, there's hard money, which includes hard money is like an institutional loan, but non-bank. Okay. Which includes transactional funding. It's expensive money, but as long as you get rid of the property quickly, you should be okay. All right. Anyway, that's about what I had to show, Rick. What I added was that little bit at the end about how to possibly avoid, the whole thing with the non-assignments and the title seasoning issues. But anyway.
The end slides are probably the more difficult to comprehend and ingest for some newcomers. So might have something to follow up with that maybe later.
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you, it doesn't look like we have a whole lot of participants on this one. Let me unmute everybody, see if anyone has any questions.
Okay.
Okay. Does anyone have any? Well, for some reason, some people don't want to be unmuted. Okay.
Chris and Greg.
Okay.
I didn't have a question.
Okay. If anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to go back over this. I mean, time permitting, is according to Rick. So
I think there was one thing down in the chat deal down there, Bob, about not putting the assignment fee on the contract. I think you mentioned that, but I don't know if that's still a question or not.
Oh, you mean reverse assignment thing?
No, down here in the chat where it says two comments.
Oh.
Yeah, one of them was about that not putting your assignment fee on the contract.
Okay, I see the chats. Let's take a look. Okay. Says, okay, that's Noble. Okay, he's saying, so don't put your fee on the contract. Is that a question or is that a statement? You there, Noble?
I took it as a question, but I think you went over it.
Okay, yeah. You don't put the assignment fee on the contract. You put it on the assignment of contract. Okay, that makes sense. There's two separate papers.
Right.
That helps. Does anyone else have any questions? Huh.
Thank you for your time, Bob.
No,
Very
no, thank
informative.
you, Andy. No,
Thank you, Andy. And
Thank
there's
you.
one, Bob, have you thought about May's Midlands meeting being online, or you ain't got that far?
I have to see what Governor McMaster and the powers that be say. It'd be nice to have it in person, but at the same time, you know, if this whole COVID-19 thing is still a threat, even if they allow it to be open, I still question as to whether or not we should all meet in person yet. You know,
That's
so
true. Some of us that are 104 years old can't come.
Hey, I ain't no spring chicken either, Rick.
Yeah.
But-
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
Well, I like your property inspection sheet. You share copies of that?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Let me. Is that okay, Rick? I tell you, if it's okay, I'm going to email this to Rick. Is that okay, Rick? Is it okay
That's fine.
if I email that to you? And if you could, hit up Rick for that. Is that okay, Rick?
That's perfectly fine.
All right.
Okay, everyone has Rick's email address there.
It's on the bottom there. I get emails from a lot of dead people these days, so.
It's funny you say that.
That's exactly what I was wondering.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, you know, there's several people that I know from high school days that have to do with high school reunions, and this one girl is a coordinator, and she's a sweet girl, and she sends out emails when there's news or somebody's dead or an event or that kind of stuff. If somebody has hacked her name and they're sending out this thing that says, I should have sent this to you sooner, and it's an obvious link to, I want all of your computer bytes and your money.
Wow. Yeah, it seems like the scammers spend more time trying to scam when they could be doing something productive and honestly and make more money.
In the real world enterprise, they would be millionaires.
Yeah, I've said that many times.
This is true. But anyway. Okay, well, if nobody else has any questions, Rick, do you have any comments or anything? Or
Well, again, thank everyone for coming online. It's kind of a new experience for Columbia REIA, but I'm sure we may possibly have to have it next month, depending on what Governor Foghorn says. We'll prepare for online meeting again.
Don't insult Foghorn Leghorn like that.
Well, that's our guy, good or bad. So, you know, got to go with it.
Okay, well, Rick, are we okay?
I think we are.
We in the meeting or
seeing everybody in person as soon as it's allowed.
Okay, thank you, Rick. I appreciate you hosting.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, everyone have a great evening now.
Take care.
See you all later.
See ya.